Hello everyone and welcome to round 3 of the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin. In today's matchup we will have Alexander GRISCHUK against Hikaru Nakamura. Now before this round Hikaru was leading by half a point, so it was expected that GRISCHUK would go all out and try to beat Hikaru to try to catch up with him in the lead. Anyway, GRISCHUK opened up with the move 1d4 and already a small surprise by Hikaru. Usually he plays a Nimzo defense, but in this game he played the move d5. So knight f3 by GRISCHUK. Knight f6 by Hikaru, and after c4, he played the Queen's Gambit accepted. Now, usually he goes for the Queen's Gambit declined with a move like e6, but in this case, he takes on c4, probably to try to surprise GRISCHUK early on. So e3, e6, bishop takes c4, c5, this is all pretty standard, castles, and a6. Now there's a lot of things black can do here. b3 is one of the main moves, knight c3, queen e2, literally any move, you name it, it's playable here for white. And GRISCHUK played rook e1. And after rook e1, Hikaru thought for a little bit and he played the move knight c6. Knight c3 by GRISCHUK and bishop e7 by Hikaru. Now here there's a lot of things white can do, and given the fact that GRISCHUK, he kind of went all out trying to beat Bakro yesterday, we kind of expected him to play a move like a3, trying to keep all the pieces on the board and go for a very fighting position. However, in the game he played pawn takes c5, which goes into the endgame. So Hikaru traded on d1, rook takes d1, and recaptured the pawn on c5. And after bishop takes c5, white played bishop d2, bishop d7, and rook ac1. Now, there's always tactics with removing the knight and hitting the bishop on c5, but Hikaru just castled, and after bishop a2, he played the move bishop a7. Now, I had a quick interview with him after the game and asked him why he did not play the move rook fd8. And he thought that there white would have to move knight d5, and indeed this looks quite problematic. Because if you move the bishop, white can take on f6 and ruin black's pawns. And if you take the knight, then white takes the bishop, and white should have quite a nice advantage with the two bishops here. But the move that Hikaru missed is the move knight e4 and defend the bishop that way, and here black is completely fine. So Hikaru played bishop to a7, knight g5 by GRISCHUK. A very nice move. He wants to go knight e4 and put the knight on d6 or the knight on c5. Knight e7 by Hikaru. Hikaru could have also played rook after d8, and after the move knight e4. Actually, Hikaru pointed out after the game that knight e4 is not the best move. The best move is actually knight ce4, because if white goes knight e4, black still has to move knight e8 to cover the d6 square that way. But after knight ce4, black is forced to trade on e4, because if you go knight e8 here, there's bishop h5, which is quite annoying, provoking this pawn forward, and now black has a lot of weaknesses. And after bishop e2, white has quite a pleasant advantage. But let's say after knight ce4, the trade happens on e4, white is trying to go knight to d6 and knight to c5, so black has to go bishop e8, and after a move like bishop c3, things are quite unpleasant for black, because white is trying to go knight to d6, hit the pawn on b7, or capture the bishop pair, and things are not that great for black. Which is why Hikaru did not play rook after d8. He played knight e7. After knight e7, GRISCHUK played knight ce4. Hikaru traded and played the move bishop c6, hitting the knight. And after knight d6, he played rook after d8. And as we're doing commentary here, we expected a move like bishop a5, but as Hikaru said after the game, he thought that the position, he shouldn't be too worried after a move like rook to d7. White is a tiny bit better, but it's really difficult to prove, and black is very, very solid. But instead of all that, GRISCHUK went for the shocking knight takes b7. Wait, what? Isn't he just hanging a knight here? Well, not quite. Hikaru had to take the knight, but here came rook c7, and all of a sudden he has a double attack on the bishop and the knight. Let's have a look at all of the lines here. Now, the first move that comes to mind here to Hikaru and both to GRISCHUK was the move bishop to e4. Now, white can take the knight on e7, and black has to move bishop c2, hitting the rook, and if the rook moves, we take the bishop. So it looks like white is just winning, black is just winning, right? But the line continues. White goes rook to c1, and after rook takes d2, white has to move bishop f3 to hit the rook, which is defending this bishop over here. Black could sacrifice this bishop on e3, this is called a desperado, but after pawn takes c3, white is still a bit better. I mean, this pawn on a6 can always be weak, and the black position is kind of loose. And after a move like rook d8, rook takes a7, there is no backrank checkmate because this bishop is covering the square. So bishop e4 is not a good move. Now, black could also play a move like bishop d5. This is more solid, because if white takes on e7, there's the move bishop c5, hitting the rook. Let's say the rook moves back, you go bishop e6, hit the rook, and take the pawn on a2. This probably leads to very dry positions. But Hikaru spotted another idea. Instead of all that, he found bishop c6, white takes the knight, and bishop b6. And all of a sudden, how is this rook ever getting out of e7? I mean, black can go king f8 on the next move and just trap it, right? But GRISCHUK kept his cool and still found some nice only moves. Now, white cannot play a move like rook c1 here, hitting the bishop, because black takes the bishop on d2, and after rook takes c6, black takes on e2. And if you take this bishop over here, black has rook e1, checkmate. The king is stuck behind this wall of pawns. And you do not have time for a move like king f1, hitting the rook and the bishop, because black goes rook takes b2, and defends the bishop and is up a piece and is winning. Alright, so all of that doesn't work for white. So GRISCHUK played the move king f1. And it's also worth pointing out that a move like bishop c3 also loses because black trades on d1 and goes bishop d8, and the rook is just trapped. White is losing here. But GRISCHUK found this move king to f1, and things are not that easy. If black plays king to f8 here, white has bishop b4, defending the rook and suddenly creating a battery along this diagonal. So what did Hikaru do? He played a5 first, taking away this square from the bishop. So now he's all ready to go king to f8 and trap the rook. But GRISCHUK found the move rook to c1. And once again, things are not that easy. You can trap the rook now, but in the process you lose your bishop. And after king takes bishop c3, this pawn is under attack, this bishop is under attack. So white will get another pawn and should be fine here. So black could have also taken on g2, and after king takes, take on d2, and this bishop is under attack, this pawn is under attack. In many lines, this pawn is under attack as well, but Hikaru felt that he did not have any realistic winning chances here after someone like king f3, rook takes b2, and rook to c6. He felt like, okay, black's up a pawn, but with the opposite colored bishops, white should always be able to draw this. For example, if black goes g6, white can go rook to b7, hitting the bishop. If the bishop goes to d4, white will trade one pair of rooks, and then he will trade another pair of rooks. Otherwise, white will win the pawn on a5. So Hikaru didn't quite fancy that either. So instead of that, he played the move bishop e4. Now came rook c4 by GRISCHUK, hitting the bishop. Once again, if black has just one more move, that this rook is going to get trapped. But rook c4 came, hitting the bishop. And what are you going to do about it? I mean, you want to keep defending the b7 square. And if you go to d5, which looks great, right? You hit the rook, we can still go king f8 on the next move, but all of a sudden, there's rook f4. And this simple threat is not easy to defend against at all. Hikaru said he looked at bishop to c5, hitting the rook. If the rook goes here, he has bishop d6 with a double attack. But the problem is that after bishop to c5, white now takes on f7, and after e5, there's the amazing move rook 7 to f5. And if you take this rook here, white's going to sacrifice the rook for the bishop, and after rook takes bishop c4. And even though black is up a rook and an exchange, you're going to lose a full rook here, and white will have full compensation, because white still has two pawns. Because after rook to d8, there's e4, and guess what? All of a sudden, white's even better, because actually both these pawns are hanging. So, very, very complicated lines. So, Hikaru couldn't really figure out a win here. And shockingly, there is nothing. There's no line that is winning for black. He played the move king f8, but now GRISCHUK took the bishop, and after king takes c7, black is up in exchange, but white has the two bishops, which are really controlling most of the squares on the board. GRISCHUK played bishop to c3, hitting the pawn, so Hikaru played g5 to save it. g4 by GRISCHUK, rook ac8, rook a4, attacking the pawn on a5. Hikaru played rook to d5 to defend it. King g2 by GRISCHUK, and there isn't really much both sides can do. I mean, all these entry squares are blocked by the bishops. And what are you going to do here with black? I mean, you also have to always keep defending this pawn on a5. So h6 was played by Hikaru, h3 by GRISCHUK, slowly improving, rook dc5, king f3. And maybe Hikaru could have kept the game going here with a bit longer with a move like bishop to c7, bishop coming to f5, maybe, but he felt like he didn't have any realistic chances to win here. So instead of all that, he traded on c3, and after pawn takes c3, rook takes c3, a draw was agreed in the game between Alexander GRISCHUK and Hikaru. So Hikaru, with this draw, stays in the lead with 2 points out of 3 games, but right behind him is Alexander GRISCHUK, and Alexander Andrei Yesipenko with 1.5 points. Still 3 more rounds to go, but it's looking pretty good for Hikaru in his race to the Candidates Tournament. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.